Awesome. So, welcome to Shooting the Crit, a little talk show run by the Forever DMs. I'm a member of the Forever DMs and a world crafter for Astral Table, Bill Bug, and with me today is
I am Jacob Evilhair. I am the resident tech wizard of the Forever DMs, and enjoy getting to play in these lovely games and occasionally coming on here to chat.
I'm Sean Kelly. I'm a mental health counselor, and I use D&D as my self-care, whether it's DMing or playing. I'm just happy to be a part of it.
so
Nice.
we're gonna be discussing a few questions that have been sent to us within the last week. But feel free in chat and everything like that to ask if you have any questions about rules or any questions related to the questions that we're covering. Feel free. We will definitely answer those as well. So, kicking this off, let's go with the first one on the
Actually,
list.
if I might, just before we jump into this,
Yeah.
just as a quick announcement for our channel in general, as of today, I finally got everything caught back up on all of our currently streamed games, and everything can be found from the very start of when we began streaming back in November, for all of our content, for both of our campaigns here on Twitch, as well as in our YouTube, but they're all right here on Twitch. So if you decide to give us a watch and you are joining in part of the way through and you want to catch up and figure out what's going on, all kinds of content below. Check it out. We got two different games, Breakfast and Dragons that airs on Saturday mornings, and Thrain on Tuesday evenings. They run every other week, so we usually do Shooting the Crit on the off weeks of
Yeah.
Thrain. So check them out, and hope to see you at the next one.
Okay. With that, we'll start with the first question. Um, so, Sinan, how strict to rules as written do you keep your games and why?
Ooh,
I'm happy to start off with this one.
Okay.
give it a go.
I am super laissez-faire when it comes to rules written. I don't think I've ever run a actual module that I did not create myself. So I am all about the homebrew approach to things, and I think that D&D itself is just a fantastic creative outlet, and there's no better way to do that than letting yourself get off the book and away from the page every once in a while.
For sure. I like to run kind of a middle ground there. The longest running campaign that I have done was a module, but I modified the crap out of it. Um, and beyond that, I love coming up with things that are not standard. So magical items, feats, etc., things along those lines. The real trick to that is figuring out how to balance that. Um, so I like to run a middle ground. I try not to homebrew if you don't have to, but also if something doesn't fit, I'm more than happy to find a means to make that work for a character or a player. Um, Reimagine something so that it fits better into the world. However that works.
When it comes to rules as written, I keep close to it to an extent because I want the players to feel like they have that sense of control because they're working in the same universe that I'm working in. Um, so no matter what monster, whether I reskin it or anything like that, they are aware that it's going to work in the same respect that they do, unless I homebrew something that comes into it. But I always fall into the line of the rule of cool always is going to outrule the rules as written to me.
I find with like having veteran players or people who have played before that, that idea of a certain monster popped up and they're like, oh, I know the stat block. So that's when I find that like the homebrew and kind of doing things off book comes into play and helps a little bit more. Just keep them on their toes.
I was gonna say I think the most common thing that I homebrewed and changed up in the campaign of mine that you played in, Sean, were the monsters. In particular, whenever you start getting into higher level campaigns, if you're going strictly by 5e rules, a lot of times the monsters kind of don't keep up with the power creep to the party. You add in feats to the party, other optional things, and all that, like you are adding additional power to the party. So unless you're keeping everything super strict to the baseline rules, it's very easy for the party's power level to like outpace what things are in the standard stat blocks. I think my favorite addition that I wound up using, I'm blanking on the name of it at the moment, but it was basically a means of applying monster feats to various pre-created stat blocks. So since you all were operating with feats in our campaign, you all had a lot of power going on by the time you hit levels 10 plus, and monsters were just like, you all were just stomping everything. Um, so and so adding this, it was a really well thought out system for based off of the CR of a creature having points to spend towards that, which added a means of customization that you can change up. So like you could have two fire giants that have two entirely separate feats. It's more to juggle as a DM and remember, but at the same time gives that flexibility where you're not just, oh, it's another fire giant. I know this stat block inside and out. It's blah, right? Like it keeps things interesting.
So to answer a question that I see in chat from Mrs. Wardy, my definition of super strict is, I'm trying to say, it's one of those things that's easy to have in your head, but basically, I'm not going to go in for a villain or an enemy and completely rewrite a spell. The spells that they cast are going to be in the book, unless it's a spell I write myself. But it's pretty much, I'm going to stick to the rules that are in the book. I'm not going to create a new rule or anything like that. I try to stick with, because 5e has done a very good job of streamlining a lot of the rules, a lot of the content, and I like the way it's written. So I try to stick as close to the rules as I can without adding anything in that'll jumble it up. You know, make it a little too powerful or make it way too weak. Unless there is a known, like if you go online, there's known spells that have a problem. Like I think back in the day before they nerfed it, Healing Spirit. Healing Spirit had a massive problem that there's actually a really funny video online if you watch it where they give the akin to the marching band healing to
The
where
the
you can just
healing
walk.
healing spirit conga line. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just keep walking through it, and they realized it was a problem. So I did take it upon myself to try to nerf the healing spirit in my game because it was really strong. And
It was really strong if players decided to manipulate it in that
yeah,
way.
but strict to me is just keeping with the rules that are in the book because I want to work within the same framework as the players. And my favorite thing to do is that I usually reskin monsters. Like in this Saturday's Breakfast and Dragons, the two monsters that you guys fought were by the book Bodox. That's it.
Yeah.
It's like I just did different with the descriptions of their powers,
Sure.
didn't change anything, and gave them another like character outlook. But more character art. Like if I put a Bodog picture out there, half of us are DMs. We're gonna know what that is, you know. But
Right.
it's like it was just a simple change.
I think to me, like the idea of being too strict is whenever you oftentimes goes hand in hand with ignoring the rule of cool. So if by the book something doesn't work, and I'm half curious whether or not Sean is laughing about the example that's going through my head right now because he was a part of what I'm about to talk about here. If by the book something just does not work, but the player is super amped about it, it's not something that's going to break anything. It's not going to destroy the outcome of what's going on. It's not going to just completely ruin the rest of the experience, but it allows the player to do something cool. If you ignore that and stick to the rules, you have lessened the fun of the player just because of rules. So the example that I have from that was Sean in the campaign that I referenced before had an idea where he wanted to shoot this vial of oil across this chasm using his hand crossbow, and he rolls a nat 20 on the attack roll. Like, he nat 20. He's super amped about it. Everybody's pumped around the table. And I'm going, it's too far. There's no way for it to make it. And one of the rules that I had in place was that a nat 20 on an attack roll or a skill check does not necessarily indicate that that absolutely succeeds, right? So, I'm sorry, it wasn't an attack roll. It was a skill check specifically. And he nat 20'd it. I explained it that, oh, it shoots super straight, super far, like you didn't think it would possibly work that way, but still falls short and does nothing. Like, I did not embrace the rule of cool in that moment to stick to the reality of the situation, to the rules. And on that day, I lessened Sean's fun for no real purpose other than those were the rules. Like, that to me is an overly strict situation. And I learned from that. And I'd like to think that I do a lot better about that these days. But yeah, so to me, that is super strict, or like too strict.
That is absolutely the example I was thinking of. And to your credit, the rest of that campaign was, I don't think that ever came up again. Of a thing where it was like, oh, this would be cool. And then you didn't let us make it work in some fashion. I would say that when I think of being strict, I'm always going to use what's written as kind of the skeleton of how I run my games. But I am not strict. And I ran a homebrew campaign where everybody's upside down in Wonderland, and like the party just stomped on everything because everything was super goofy and like not. That's where I learned about the monsters and needing to be a little looser with those things, because you pull in these stat blocks, and that was tier 3, tier 4 play, and I'm bringing in these monsters just as stepping stones and not even blocking our character's path. I think a lot of it would have to do with like min-maxers too. When you think of your players, if you're going to have somebody who's actively working to extort any loophole they can find, I'm going to throw something to stop that.
You're talking about the players that are trying to win D&D.
Yeah.
Right. I am 100% in it for the story and the creativity, and to see those gears turning in my players when I throw them problems. And if there's someone who's just trying to exploit that system, you bet your ass I'm going to come up with something homebrew to stomp on them.
You gotta have something to counter it, right? Because like if you have a player that is taking something that by the system tends to work extremely well, and that just becomes their MO, that's the only thing that they do, eventually that stops being fun, right? So like I don't view putting like a stop to that as like stomping on like the player's idea or what they're doing. I view it as presenting a challenge. Like if that challenge does not exist, is it as fun as it could be? Like, it's your job as the DM to help facilitate that fun at the table. So if it just winds up being a nonstop onslaught of this thing happens, and you never address it, and that thing just continues to trivialize a situation, it gets boring for everyone, for the DM, for the players. Like, it just stops being fun. So finding ways to challenge them in those situations, even if you have to step outside of the rules, I think is important.
That's a much more tactful way of saying that. I appreciate that. Yeah, not necessarily stomping on your players' ideas, but creating something that does make it more of a multi-aspect puzzle or challenge for them. Yeah, thank you.
And that's what I was about to say, is it's some people find their fun in different aspects, and I don't want to say that mid-maxers play wrong. No, it's what their fun is. Does it fit at the table that they're at? Maybe not. I mean, but that's the fun they have. It's somebody, there might be a player out there might be several players out there that enjoy going online and finding the combinations, the class combinations, whatever they have to build to make this uber powerful character. And I'll listen to this one DM. I hate to give him credit because I honestly forgot his name. Um, he said a long time ago, he's like, take those players to the side and tell them you've done it. You have successfully won D&D. But the problem is that I'm going to have to throw harder and harder monsters to fight you, and that's not fair to the other players. So help me make the table fun for them and bring them into it.
So I think that a lot of that, if you're sitting down to a random group of people or a new group or something along those lines, you don't always necessarily have time to have these conversations. But we've talked about in other episodes of this the importance of, like session ones, right? Like establishing the tone of the game and how people are expecting to play, what people want out of it, and understanding what people want of their games before you get started. Because not everybody's there to play the same game necessarily. You hope that you have a table where everybody's there to play the same game, and when you do, it's great. But it doesn't always quite go that way. And sometimes that changes from week to week. Sometimes you show up and like every other week you are super into role play and all that, but sometimes you show up a week and it's like, man, I just want to fight some stuff. Can we just do combat? Like, you know what I mean? Like everybody has those times, but pre-establishing the game that you're there to play and what interests you in the game, knowing that about your party and your table is important. I think you wind up alleviating a lot of problems in those situations where you worry about the min-maxers, the murder hobos, things along those lines. You know what to expect, so you plan accordingly for it, and then it's fine. So, yeah.
So, let's see. That covers that one. Moving on, we have our second question. When homebrewing items, spells, feats, monsters, etc., how do you approach balancing it?
I'll start off on this one, I think. So my go-to anytime I am looking to create something new is I first look to see if there's anything close to it that I can use as a template in 5e. As Bill put out, they have done a really good job in 5e of structuring things consistently. So I try and look that same direction as much as possible before I go outside of that. The other side of that, so like the feats that I mentioned before, the monster feats, those are largely structured in a similar kind of way and progression that player character feats operate. They're worded very similarly. The book and document that exists out there for that, which I strongly suggest anybody look at it if you ever want to manipulate monsters in a fun way in a game where players are using feats. It does a really good job of mimicking the types of things that players get as feats, and then monsters get them. There's a lot of different stuff too, but they've done a very good job of already doing that legwork for you. And there's so many good resources out there that people have. There's also a lot of resources that there's not, so you gotta be careful and watch what you're looking at. But that is always my go-to, is like I will always look for something else first. And then if I bring it into the game, I will always, if it's something large, I will always talk to my players and say, hey, I'm going to use this. We're going to see how it goes. We'll tone it down or amp it up as we need to, but we're going to start here, and then we'll adjust how we need to as it goes on.
Yeah, I think the openness with your players about it. I mentioned that I have a more like homebrew kind of create my own world thing or approach to DMing. And I am very upfront with my players anytime I bring in something new. I was telling you all before we started rolling about my wizard player in my new campaign who wanted a fun familiar, so we gave her like a Calcifer style fire elemental bouncing around. And I was like, we can do this. This will be cute. This will be fun. But if it becomes an issue at any point, I reserve the right to, again, go back, change it, whatever. I really like what Jacob said about finding something close by. I agree that 5e did a fantastic job of providing a skeleton, and that skeleton leads to some really creative ideas outside of itself. I think, unfortunately, a lot of it is trial and error, right? You got to play test your homebrew.
Yeah.
So I know in the Wonderland campaign, I gave you all a hookah at one point, and I was like, this would be super cool. It'd be like Heroes Feast kind of thing, but a hookah. And I made it last I made the effects last like 8 hours. Why did I do that? That was a dumb decision.
Yeah, we basically just had like perma bless on the party. It was.
So I mean, a lot of it is just being able to have that conversation with your players of, I'm going to try this thing. It should be really cool. If it's not, here's what we're going to do about it.
When it comes to this term homebrew, it's come up a lot in 5e. Like when someone says, "Hey, I've got a homebrew world." Not to pull the old man card, but back in my day, like when we played second edition, that was D&D. Like there was Forgotten Realms, there was Ravenloft, there were these worlds, but you created your own world, and it wasn't a homebrew world; it was just D&D. So to me, homebrew, when I say those words, homebrew are like rules and items that are not an official content that you bring in. Yeah. So my world, Straterra, that I play in Breakfast and Dragons, the world is over 20 years old. It's lived through second edition D&D, all through third. Didn't touch fourth, went to Pathfinder, came back at fifth. It's done a lot of growing. It's got 20 years of player-driven history. But when it comes to homebrew itself, I am so trigger shy when it comes to me making something, because my biggest fear is I'm going to make something too strong. And because it's happened before. I've made a monster or something, and I'm like, this is really cool. This is really awesome. I'm killing my party. Yeah, no. And I have to scale it back during the fight. I have to okay, no. And so that's when, thank God, we have the Forever DMs, because Jacob's been a sounding board, Gabriel, my best friend's been a sounding board, and I'll be like, hey, take a look at this. Is this too strong? How does this look? So oftentimes I find myself, I scour the internet looking at all these homebrew creations that people create, and I'll either manipulate them a little bit and bring them into my game, or I'll do what Jacob says, look at something that's in 5e, and if it's close to what I want, I'll change it. My world, there's firearms, because it's a Victorian horror setting. It's dark. There's a whole kingdom of soldiers that are trained with firearms. So I just take the mercenary class, and the knight class, all the NPCs they already got, and just change up a couple of weapons using the same stat block, same bonuses, and just change in damages. Or if I'm doing something on the fly, just grab a bandit. All of a sudden, their longbow is a rifle or a pistol.
Right.
And you just keep the same stats.
Just reskin it.
Exactly. My favorite thing is reskinning. I love reskinning. It's so easy to do on the fly.
Tiffers brings up a really good point that I was actually just about to make. Understanding that you can rescale something on the fly in combat is super important, especially whenever you have introduced something completely homebrew. And it's oh, turns out this is stomping my party. Anytime you're working with something homebrew, and even sometimes whenever the party just seems to have a really hard time with something, consider the encounter beforehand if you can. If you have that option whenever you're planning or doing your prep or anything along those lines, and plan on a Rick board. If your goal in this encounter is not for it to be a deadly encounter to the party, you are not looking for this to kill anybody or have a chance of killing anybody, then have that ripcord. Like if that's not where you want the story to go, you have the power as the DM to change that at any point in time. Like Bill, we did a one shot, our monthly game that we had before we started streaming, where you all took on like this whole council of everything, and there was a point where I was like, all right, I tuned this a little too high. I'm not really looking to kill anybody, and I gave a thematic reason, and the wizard in the group bamfed out because he was not having where things were going, and he's just gone. One less thing involved in the encounter, things started moving more smoothly for the party. It went on from there. Like, have those moments and means of changing things. It can be as simple as changing how many hit points something has. Like, it can be that easy.
Good example. I had a big bad in a dungeon, like in Stratera, before you guys played in a dungeon called the Arcane Grave. They fought in Altoon, and if you guys don't know what it is, it's basically a Mind Flayer Lich.
Yep.
I wanted to give it a legendary actions. I struggle to this day with legendary actions. And I gave him this really awesome legendary action called Of Two Minds, because it's a psionic character, and he could basically concentrate on use a legendary action to cast a second concentration spell and concentrate on both. Now, this comes into play. What if he fails a concentration check? Yeah, what if he fails a concentration check? Well, the oldest one he's been concentrating on goes away. That was really good legendary action. But it was so strong it needed to be the only one he had. So I ended up dropping the rest of them during combat.
Yeah.
Well, that's something you mentioned, like struggling with that idea because you don't want to accidentally wipe your party. Like that's something that held me back in Wonderland, and I'm really working on in this new campaign is this idea of like, without playtesting it, how do you know what too strong is?
That's a big deal.
So again, I think that you have to step away, as we're talking about raw versus other aspects. Like, I think you have to be able to step away from a template or a book or whatever and pull that cord like Jacob was talking about. Whatever you can make fit, it doesn't have to be by the book as long as it maintains the fun part of your party.
That's like as a DM, that means setting your ego aside and going, okay. I did.
Yep.
And
no.
there's also the aspect of it that if an encounter winds up being super dangerous for the party and like it's looking like a TPK kind of situation, just because the party goes down doesn't mean everybody has to die. Like, you can manipulate that in a different way. They thought they were taking down the big bad here. Turns out they were not ready. So things go sideways. The story progresses. Where does it go from there? Like, you can handle a lot of that. Like, that ripcord doesn't necessarily have to be stopping combat. That ripcord can be... Sometimes that ripcord can actually be amping it up that much more. Like, it's not going well for them. Introduce something where, hey, look, you weren't even close. You were so not close. Here's why. And now they see, oh, this was not the end yet. What happens from here? The story continues. The only way you lose D&D is if the story can't continue whenever you intend for it to.
One of my most fun, and maybe it was because I was playing a rogue at the time, but one of my most fun playing experiences was in a certain module involving giants. We woke up in cages in like a giant's castle after biting off way more than we could chew. And that idea of like, oh, okay, so the story isn't over. We didn't die necessarily, but now we have this set of problems to overcome. We're naked, we're in cages, how do we get out? How do we regain our presence in the story?
A TPK is not the end of the story. Like, I've had an accidental TPK before, and they woke up in a hag's hut with her raising them all, and now they're bound to the hag. They have to earn their lives back, and that just goes into like a whole different direction. It's like they're captured by the guard, this, that, and the other. One of the biggest problems I have is sometimes you'll write a thematic fight that the party just can't win. But this is D&D, and a lot of people just think they can win every fight,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no running.
Man, when you want them to run, you gotta
They
make
won't.
you gotta make sure it's very clear that that's not a fight that they will win. I mean, way overdo it, and it has to be super clear real fast, because
Oh, yeah.
otherwise, you are correct. Most people will stand and fight because they think they have plot armor. Like, if that's not the game you're playing, you don't.
Perfect example of that
Are you
is
kidding me?
I play in an Avernus game on Sundays. That's my relaxed game. It's my game away from the stream, away from the Forever DMs. It's a great group of people from California I play with over Tabletop Simulator, and they're probably watching right now. But we just did, no spoilers if you haven't played Avernus, plug your ears. But we were doing Harmon's Hill, and Harmon shows up. And I'm playing a paladin in Avernus, so my paladin Minotaur is like, you know what? I'm standing my ground. I am going to protect my party. I cast, um, compelled duel on Harmon, so he comes to me. I'm pulling out the shield. I'm pulling out the sword. I'm tanking it up. The party just decided that means we're gonna fight. We ended up killing Harmon.
Sometimes it goes that way.
It's like, okay, that awesome. All right.
Well, that happened.
Then that happened. That was pretty much it. It was like that moment of, oh, then that happened. Because every hit, I like saved all my spells and everything. I'm just like Divine Smite, Divine Smite, Divine Smite, like every time. But it's those moments. It's sometimes you can plan. You can write as a DM. You're like, oh, this is gonna be epic. This is gonna be awesome. The party's gonna realize this big bad's going to be way too strong on them. It's going to epic chase scene and everything. Okay, they're standing their ground. Oh crap! What do we do?
The best thing you can do as a DM in that situation is not go into a situation ever expecting that the party will run. So you have to be prepared with everything that you're threatening them with to actually know how to throw it at them. That you can't go, oh, cool, I've got these 6 super high level dudes that, like, they're totally not going to fight. They're going to run from. They know these guys are bad news, right? If you don't know how to play them and prove that they're bad news, your players are not going to take it seriously, and you may wind up in a situation where, they take them out because you as a DM are not prepared to actually play them.
Yeah, I had a game in Straterra where there is a bog called Brokeback Bog in that world, and it is a bog filled with undead, but they're unique undead. They're actually a homebrew creature that I found called a dread vine, and it's the vine itself animates, like, wiggles into the corpses and animates the corpses. So anything that falls dead, you roll a percentile to see if these vines crawl within the body and start animating the dead. So you can't turn undead because of these things. They're really awesome, really, really cool concept. I wanted a chase scene. I wanted them to realize that we can't handle these things, and they start running, and then they run into someone that can help them out. That was the plan. Well, you know what they say about plans. They don't survive first engagement.
Right.
And so we're halfway. One person survived. So we had a moment, like, I cut quick, and I was like, okay, so this is what happens. Gave a little bit of storytelling. The next game the following week, they wake up in a gypsy camp, and they've been rezzed by the matriarch of the tribe, and basically explained how horrible this place is and everything like that. But what that ended up happening is now they had a personal investment in the area. They realized how bad it was, and that they had to do something about it. And so it works out in the end. But yeah, totally did not plan for that.
I'm still impressed that you play Avernus as your stress relief game. That's like playing Strahd as your stress relief game.
I'm having a blast with it, man. Like, that Avernus was a module that I was reading into, and I was like, man, I don't want to run this. I want to play this. And I just put the book back on the shelf. I was like, this is amazing. And our DM James, he's great with it. His his descriptions and how he does everything. And like, I love how everything in that book, every description of everything in that book sounds like a heavy death metal Norwegian band album cover.
Yep.
And it's awesome.
The little things.
Yeah. Okay. So going into question 3, how do you resolve ruling issues at table?
I'm happy to step up on that one if you'd like.
Up to you. I can take it if you want to, or it's all you if you want it.
I can say what I do, and honestly, it's I give a big long list of even before um session 0. Like, I will give a list of the campaign of how we're going to handle things, and one of the things is it states all ruling issues at table is per the GM's ruling. Anything more is discussed between table, and it's basically rated flow of play. It's anything, like if it's a ruling issue, as a GM, I might pull something out of my butt and say, okay, this is what happens. Give me this skill check. Give me this whatever, and let's keep going. It's like, I will not stop the flow of play unless the rule issue is going to result in a character death. Then I'll be like, okay, let's get a rule book out. Let's make sure we can figure this out. Then I'll pause for a second and look. But if it's not going to result in a character death, I'm just like, I'll come up with something real quick, and we'll handle it between sessions where it belongs.
I think that's a super solid limit to set on that. The most that it's or the most helpful advice, I guess, I've ever been given about this was from Jacob in response to having a player that just wasn't engaging very well, and that idea of her expectations of what should happen versus my retelling of what happens when that thing fails, or if that skill check fails, if that spell fails, whatever. And using that as an opportunity to resolve the issue in the environment that you're playing in. So XYZ happens, you didn't make it work, or it doesn't work in the way that I, as the GM, see the world developing. So this is what happens instead. So that there's not that kind of argument of failure or anything like that. It still has an effect. It still has its impact on the world. It just might not be exactly what they originally intended.
Yeah, striving to always give a result, even if it's not the result that they wanted, not just, no, it doesn't work. Like, that's way less interesting than being able to explain what happens in that failure, and less likely to cause an argument, or not necessarily an argument, that's taking it a little far, but like that conflict moment of, well, why doesn't it work? In the rules it says blah, right? Like, you avoid that entirely whenever you still give them something. But I'm with Bill on this almost to the T of looking up rules mid-game slows things down. If there cannot be an answer gotten within 10 to 15 seconds of the question, a ruling is made, we move on, I jot it down, I find the answer later, and then I ping my players later and say, hey, here's how we handled this before, here's how we're gonna handle this going forward, here's what I found on it, this is what Wizards of the Coast has stated about various things through sage advice or whatever else. Find those answers later. Don't stop the game to find them at that moment. Make a ruling, move on, and generally speaking, people are going to be happier that things continue moving than they are just everything stopping. And everybody's sitting on their phones, twiddling around. Nobody's engaged. You break everything. Like, it just, when in doubt, keep moving.
Cheat sheets. That's like one of the big go-tos. I just made a PDF cheat sheet for Astral. Like, you just drop it into your handouts. Your players always have access to it, and just flip through. I think I gave that to you, Sean, for your new players. It's
gotten a very positive response thus far.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a godsend. You just flip through, because I find myself using it. Like, it's like, boom, 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 boom. Okay, here we go. Conditions. because there's so many conditions. It's like, what's the difference between restrained and paralyzed? And what can restrained people do? It's just always like, oh, they can do that.
I will
Um,
say, like, the ability, well, I say the because we've all been forced to play online, like the ease by which a player can go and find information to help resolve things and help out with the DM sometimes. Like, you don't want to step on the DM's toes. DM's decision is what it is. You move on. Don't stop the game and be like, wait, but this says nope. DM's already made the ruling. Move on. Talk about it later. But you can quickly find that, and you can look up things to check yourself before it gets to your turn. Like, you can help remove the potential of that rulings conflict by already knowing the answer.
it's like, I'm like, as a DM, I don't know all the spells, and if someone pulls a spell out that I've never heard of or I just never read, I'll usually go to, hey, read me that real quick. And while they're reading it to me, I'm figuring out, how I'm going to react to it or what I'm going to do. But as the bonus of being a player and a DM, when I'm playing, there's certain things that I do to try to take weight off the DM's shoulders. And one of those things is, if you're a spellcaster that has access to concentration spells, track your own concentration.
Oh yeah.
Don't
100%.
Yeah, don't worry about the DM. Don't wait till the DM calls for your concentration roll. If you took damage, you're making that roll. Make that roll and just say, hey, I made my concentration check. Because you know that DC. You know it's going to be 10, and it's going to be the damage plus, whatever above 10. You know what it is. You know what you have to roll to make it. And, just tell them, it's like, hey, I made it. Or, hey, I didn't make it. By the way, that spell drop. You do that for your DM, that DM's going to be your best friend. Because it is going to be one of the things on top of everything else he's worried about or she's worried about at the table, that it's just taken off their shoulders.
Yep.
That's how you earn yourself a little Calcifer familiar. I have an idea of how you all will answer this, because we all kind of have the more proactive sense when we DM. But when you have that one player who wants to be the rules lawyer and argue that with you, what do you do?
To me, I mean, this comes down to, again, kind of going back to that session 0, and obviously this can occur in a situation that wouldn't be the norm. Sometimes it can just happen. But when it comes down to it, like, pre-establish DM ruling is the end all when it comes down to it. Like, trust the DM to make a decision that's going to be the best thing for the table at that moment. Mm-hmm. Now, if a DM is breaking that trust, that's a different problem. It's time to have a conversation off table. But trust that the DM is there to make the best decision for the table, for the story, and for the fun of everyone involved. DMs and players alike, because we're all there to cooperatively do this together. So a lot of times the rules lawyer will know the ruling and they can spout it off. And in all honesty, if somebody can give me that ruling off the top of their head, all right, that sounds right. We move on with that. Sometimes you just accept their ruling and you move on with it. You can always jot it down and go double check it later. But when it comes down to it, that DM ruling is the end all to keep things moving.
It comes down to trust your DM that what they're doing. You have to break away with the mentality that it's players versus DM. Mm-hmm. It's not players versus DM. It's you guys are playing a game together. You have to trust that this is not a game to win, and that the DM is going to make the best decision that continues forward with the story and with the players. And even in that moment, I mean, it comes down to just trust them. Just trust what they're going to say. Even if you know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they're reading that rule wrong, get with them between games. Do not stop the flow of game. Do not, for what's that term, yuck on everyone's yum at the moment, to just so you can be right. Because there's a lot more important when it comes to playing D&D other than being right, and that's having fun. And that's honestly all I have to say about that.
It really does come down to trust. And that trust goes both ways, both from DM to player and player to DM. So long as everybody is there and on board and has that agreement and trust that everybody's there to make the best game they can, then I feel like you will avoid a lot of conflict. But yeah, if you have something that you want to bring up to them, bring it up in between games. You generally have at least a week before you're going to be back at table again. So you got a lot of time to chat it out.
And even then, even if you're lucky that you're playing for like hours on end, you're going to have a potty break. Just bring it up then.
Right. Chat it out on break.
So, let's see. Next question. What rules do you struggle with as a DM, and how do you handle them when they come up?
So this is often fixed by a cheat sheet, and one that I time and again forget to have on hand. And that is the specifications between certain different status effects. Difference between grapple versus restrained, difference between unconscious versus incapacitated versus like what's the nuance difference between each one of those different little things.
Blinded and deafened and confused and charmed and
right. Usually most of my rulings issues come down to status effects, and I'm like, God, how does that work again?
Yeah. We just introduced exhaustion for the first time in my new player campaign, so it was something fresh to them as well. That idea of like they ran into a big bad at level 2, and it wiped them, and they found themselves revivified and exhausted, and trying to keep track of okay, level 1 exhaustion is only movement, only this whatever, and just kind of trying to push through stuff like that. I think status effects are by far the hardest thing to keep track of.
Mine is like status effects to me, especially with online play. It's really easy. It's just like, okay, Google says this. That's awesome. Like I will say that's like one of the best things about being online. My Achilles heel right now, grapple. I struggle with grapple so much, and it smacked me in the face 3 sessions ago in Stratera with Oliver, because I had this encounter planned, and I don't know why I didn't see this coming. I had this encounter planned where they encountered a bear worshipping tribe on the island. And they were capturing this owlbear so that the chief's son can do combat with it, because he had to do combat with a very powerful, foe. Didn't have to win it; he just had to survive it. So they released the owlbear. Tribe found them, tracked them down. One of them had to stand in the place. Kind of a hostile moment, but not that much. So Oliver freed the owlbear. So Oliver stepped in, and it's a really funny moment because the challenger got to choose it, and the young man's like, I'm going to use my bare hands. Oliver just comes up with his club like, I'm going to beat the little boy down with a stick. Well, the little boy turned into a werebear, because there's a reason they worship bears in this tribe. So now all of a sudden nothing Oliver could do could hurt the bear.
Right. Immune to non-magical damage. So it's literally just a wooden maul. So I'm not doing squat with that.
Much in the way of the Nemean lion from Hercules' fables, Oliver just starts choking the kid out.
Listen, when you're a barbarian with +8 to your athletics check, that's all you got sometimes.
So it was trial by fire with me in the grappling rules. It seriously was. I'm sitting here in my head. I'm just like, oh god, what? Okay, so he's going to use his action to try to escape, and he's going to use his action to try to maintain. So it's like round 1, opposing athletics checks. Okay, and so like we did like 4 rounds, because it was just 2 of them fighting. 4 rounds of opposing athletic checks. Oliver had this kid even in werebear form.
Oh, he was eating
like,
dirt.
like he was not getting out, not getting out. And I'm like, MMA rules, Bill, tap out. It's like tapping out. Oliver's declared the winner. Very quick, very dramatic moment, and it like ended up being like a really, really cool encounter. But I did that to myself. Like, just I wasn't good at grapple, and like I still struggle with it a little bit. But
And
it's like,
especially
bam.
for somebody that has been through so many different iterations of D&D and Pathfinder for that matter, things like grapple have changed so drastically over the iterations.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, God, Pathfinder was literally like 2 pages worth of text of
Mm-hmm.
how does grapple work. Well, I hope you have a background in pre-calculus. So yeah, like it was ridiculous how much some of that changed, and it's a lot easier in 5e. But if you're not prepared for it, there's still some things about it that can definitely catch you off guard for sure.
And that's pretty much what it comes down to is I have to look at it as grapple is just 2 opposed athletic checks, and each character spins their action around to either maintain the grapple or break from the grapple. And that was pretty much it. And even then, it's like as soon as I hear the word grapple, I'm just like deer in the headlights. I'm just like, oh, what are those?
Well, and like it's one of those rare things in 5e where there can be like a non-definitive winner, right? Like
Yeah.
everything else when it comes down to it, whoever's making the roll, like a tie goes to the person rolling. But in opposed checks, you're both rolling. So what happens? Well, the answer is if you tie, the current state doesn't change. So if you're already in a grappled state, you stay in that grappled state. If you're not in a grappled state, you don't go into that grappled state. So like it's one of those one-off situations, and it's like I feel you. It's not an easy one to remember. It doesn't fall quite as well in line as a lot of other things do.
You did it. You did it this Saturday also with grappling the Undead Construct, which was from the Sandy Peterson book. Oh God, I love those creatures. And when you're like, oh God, this is something for the Adeptus Mechanicus, I'm like, damn right it is.
You get that 40k shit out of my game.
And you drug it back and put it back in the hole to after the explosion. I'm just like, that's yeah. It was like I'm sitting here in my head. I'm like, I hope Oliver learned from the fight with the werebear and starts grappling more shit because that's gonna make me learn the rule.
Hey, you give me reasons to grapple things, I will gladly do more than swing my sword.
As much as I love playing and I've appreciated everything that I've played, I feel almost privileged that I only started playing at 5e, so I didn't have to learn all these extra things. I feel like as a DM, it makes the rules more clear to me because I've only ever known one set.
I can absolutely understand that for sure.
I miss my second edition. I'll be honest. Like I probably could not play a second edition game again. But I do miss my second edition because we had something called THAC0. It makes absolutely no sense, but we loved it because it was all we had.
To hit armor class 0.
2-hit armor class 0. To where
Suck my THAC0 -3. That's really good.
Yeah, it wasn't as high as you can get your armor class. It's how negative can you get your armor class. It's like the dragon is a -20.
I remember. What's the video game that used that with Boo and?
The original Baldur's Gate
The
games.
first
Yes,
Baldur's Gate.
yeah.
Yep.
I remember picking that up, and I was like, "What the hell is THAC0?
Yep.
I don't understand any of these rules."
Yep.
Yep.
The only I never played a second edition game like at table. The only exposure that I had to THAC0 and second edition stuff was the NES game Pool of Radiance. That was my first foray into D&D was those. I didn't even know what was going on with the rules. It was all happening behind the scenes. But by God, we had THAC0.
Last time I was at Gen Con before the dark days, before the days of the Corona, I was walking through one of the hotels late at night, and I saw these men wearing these red hats with white letters on them, and I was like, "Oh God!" And as they come up, I start reading their hat, and it says "Make THAC0 Great Again," and I went, "Oh my God!"
Oh
This is
no.
amazing.
Oh
Where did you get
no.
your hats?
uh,
Um,
But
uh, sorry. So not necessarily rules I struggle with, but something that I wanted to mention because I've just started trying to implement this more, is I finally actually took the time to read the DMG instead of
there's
just
a lot of handy
glancing at it.
stuff in there.
Right?
there's a
Some of the
lot.
optional rules are super cool.
Yeah.
So like I have a barbarian in this game I'm running now, and like the cleave through optional rule, super cool. The idea, you crit, you kill something, you do over X amount of damage to it, you just swing through its entire body, hit the thing next to it.
Yep.
Like a lot of this has I feel like 5e also did a good job incorporating thematic based rules as well. And I didn't realize that until I started looking more at some of these optional rules.
It's like I really do enjoy the optional rules. Which actually going into let's go ahead since we're covering that, let's go ahead and jump to question 6. What optional rules do you think should be standard or vice versa?
My
Because that's a good
bad.
no, it's a good segue, dude.
Jumping
It's
ahead. Jumping ahead. That's all right.
I got
awesome segue.
Parasite. It's cool.
So I'm going to jump in here real quick. The first optional rule that I ran with, that I considered standard, that I wish I had not and will not be present in any of my games going forward, is flanking as it is written in the DMG. I love the idea of a thematic advantage of proper positioning of yourself. But the way it is written to grant advantage on those attacks trivializes so many things of various other classes' abilities that it breaks the game, in my opinion. It completely... the advantage of the positioning interest is vastly outweighed by how many toes it steps on in the process. I've tried to come up with a bunch of different ways on like how do you make it work without resulting in advantage or disadvantage and things along those lines, and I've never come up with a good answer. I honestly have not. Not without coming up with a bunch of floating modifiers, and that gets away from what 5e does well, which is not having a bunch of floating modifiers. So, yeah, that's my one optional that I think should absolutely stay optional, if not steered away from, in my opinion.
I was in a different opinion until Jacob and I at length had a conversation about this. Um, I was a fan of flanking because to me it felt like it put battlefield movement in. It's like you weren't just thinking about hitting the enemy anymore. You were thinking about where am I standing? Where do I need to stand? Other than do I need to stand over here to avoid the fireball? It's like do I need to stand over here to give my party member advantage? But one thing that was said to me by Jacob is like, think about it this way. There are so many abilities in the game that already give you advantage for this, that, and whatever reason. Like the well, because I'm playing one now, the Samurai's Fighting Spirit. Samurai's Fighting Spirit, you can bring that in, and every attack you make until your next turn is at advantage.
Yep.
You don't have to flank anybody. It's like because there's no super advantage. It's like what's the point in that? But I, in in theme and theory, I really enjoy flanking. But with a lot of the abilities put in, it's obsolete. There's no need for it because you're already going to get bonuses from other things. It's like it only comes into play for like first level, second level, third level, fourth level. As you get up there, flanking doesn't even become an issue anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
I,
And there's, like I said, there's a ton of things. Like barbarians are a great example. Why ever reckless attack if you can just move yourself into position, right? But that reckless attack to give advantage against yourself in that process, like, that's a major thematic balancing thing for barbarians. So
and so like my first ever character was a rogue, and I loved the idea of flanking, flank all day. Like, but but over time, and even as we progressed in the same campaign with those same rules over time, I was like, flanking's unnecessary. Thematically, it is super cool, and I would still, as a DM, if my players are positioning themselves and making it a point to do that, like I'm still gonna throw in the flair of, like this guy that you're fighting is such a badass that he actually blocks both of you all when someone misses, or this guy was distracted by your friend and you strike him in the back, and making those thematic choices. But as a game mechanic for the advantage purpose only, even as a rogue, over time I was like, this is like checking easy mode.
The only other fun thing about advantage is I said whatever optional rules that the players get, the enemies, the mobs get too.
Yeah.
So there was actually some really awesome moments where these high level characters are getting advantage from this ability and this ability, and all of a sudden they're fighting a bunch of Koatoa down in a sewer, and the Kuatoa are getting advantage by surrounding the characters. And you have this wizard over here that has two Kuatoa on each side of him. They're getting advantage of each of their attacks. The party realizes, oh crap, we've got to get over there. And so that changes, battlefield tactics in a way of, okay, well, we're wiping these guys out, but by the time we're done wiping everybody out, our wizard's going to be dead.
Yeah.
So they have to break off and peel off and go and save him, But kobolds get pack tactics.
Right, and that's how lots of kobolds wind up being dangerous. But if you have flanking in there where everything has that, then that's something that already exists. So you've kind of taken that away from kobolds in a way. You know what I mean? And they need all the help they can get anyway. But so we've focused a lot on flanking here as a singular optional rule. What are some other ones that you all know of that you like or don't like?
Potion as a bonus action.
Okay.
Explain.
That is one that I am still not sold on. I have it in Straterra. We're doing it in Straterra because we made a deal. The players wanted, because we had that talk, they didn't want flanking. What we did an exchange. I was like, okay, instead of doing flanking, we'll do potion as a bonus action. I just feel like it just makes it too easy to be able to pull a potion out, drink it as a bonus action, and continue fighting. It's like the idea of you're reaching in your backpack in combat. Do you have it on a thong on your hip? Okay, maybe, but it goes into, if you actually read what you can do in combat. Drawing a weapon is part of an attack. It's like, okay. Because one thing that I taught myself here recently, I realized I wasn't taking advantage of, is you get an action, bonus action, and a reaction, during a round. Manipulate object is actually something completely different.
Yep.
You can do that too on top of everything else. You can pull a lever, swing a sword, do a bonus action, do a reaction. You can do all of that in combat. And it's like a lot of DMs lose that. A lot of DMs forget that manipulating an object or using an object is part of what you can do in game. They'll say, oh, well, okay, well, that's going to eat your action. All right, that's a DM ruling, that's fine. But per the rules of the player's handbook, per the rules of the DMG, you do get that. You can open the door. You can throw the switch. You can pull the rope.
As long as it does not require a skill check.
Yeah. But I can live with potion as a bonus action. I can live with it. It's not make or break for me. It's just one of those.
Is that one in the DMG, or is that just a common homebrew? I don't think that one's actually in the DMG, is it?
I thought it was.
I could be wrong. Honestly, I could be wrong, but I could swear
I
it's
know
in there.
it's super commonly used. It's probably one of the most commonly used homebrews of 5th edition. I don't think it's in the DMG.
I know it was on that cheat sheet that you made when we were talking about action economy cheat sheets.
Mm-hmm.
I know it was on that one. I can't remember where that came from.
I could be wrong. Maybe it's in there. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's so commonly
Reaching over to
used.
the bookshelf.
It's so commonly used that like I absolutely would
Where's the
consider that
DM
like an
world
optional
ruling?
rule of 5e at this point because so many people embrace it.
I think it's honestly an optional rule that's just become meta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like everybody does it, mainly because Critical Role does it. Um, that's like a big thing, and even even God bless him, Matt Mercer in the Tal'Dorei Handbook put in a feat called Quaff of Fast Drinker, and you're able to quaff like ale and like potions as a bonus action just to explain
There was
what's going on.
there was a lot of stuff that he took that they did commonly in the first campaign that were strictly homebrew, and he introduced them in the Tal'Dorei campaign guide as feats that people could take. So like the means of casting a second spell in a round of second level or lower. Like that's another super common one that a lot of people do.
Oh, that's another
I'm
rule I
not a
struggle
huge
with
fan
sometimes.
of that one. I think it adds too much power into the spellcasters, and they have enough going on as it is. But yeah,
But when it comes down to what you can cast in a round, and it's like a cantrip and a spell. But then you get into Warcaster. Can casting a spell as a reaction? So technically, if you can only cast a cantrip and a spell around, and then something runs past you, and you get an attack of opportunity, and you have Warcaster, technically all you can cast is a cantrip.
a lot of that comes down to that's only true if that happens on your turn. Big difference
Yeah.
there is the reading of difference between turn and round. Those are two very different things. So, because you're right, like if you bonus action cast a spell, and then somebody tries to counterspell that, you can't counterspell their counterspell because you did a bonus action spell on your turn.
Oh, but the counter spell dominoes is one of the things I live for. If you
They're
have
always
multiple
fun.
casters, is like you cast a spell, bad guy counter spells. Well, one of your friends counter spells that counter spell. Well, what if the bad guy has a bard? He counter spells that counter spell, and it's just like all this happens, and the original spell still goes off.
Yep.
Yep.
No one rolled high enough. All of this was wasted.
Goodbye, spell slots.
So, I'll throw one out here that I know is an optional rule in the DMG that all of us use in our games in various form and fashion. Inspiration. So that is an optional rule that I fondly embrace, especially with the adoption of the accolades process that we do with all of our games here on the Forever DM stream, that sort of thing. Like I find that being a very positive thing that happens in games, and to me, I feel like that should be there. I would have a really hard time running a game without inspiration at this point. So I can understand why some people wouldn't want to mess with it, but for me, that's like not an optional rule.
My problem with inspiration is people forget they have one.
But that's on them though.
Because right now everybody in Straterra has it.
I'm pretty sure I have to double check Oliver's or not. I don't think I do. No, because Oliver and Ben had used theirs, and Ben was the one that wound up with it. So I'm the only one in the party currently that doesn't.
See, that's the reason I've toyed around with the homebrew rule of when you get, especially with us doing accolades, if you don't use it in the next session, you lose it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really impressed so far with. So my group that I'm playing with currently, or that I'm leading currently, is all kind of first-time players, and I've been really impressed with their ability to jump in to not only the accolades idea, and I think that they really appreciate that,
Nice.
but also their ability to identify, oh, I have that, I have this thing, whether it's inspiration or whether it's anything else. But my biggest thing so far for inspiration is that with the accolades, they also stay aware of who has the inspiration, and they've been holding themselves accountable for using it. And I think that even adds to the idea of having that inspiration point of like, you all noticed that this player did this thing and did this very well. Make sure he or she remembers that they have this reward for it.
That's cool. I love hearing
We
that.
have one last question. Checking the chat real quick, and I don't think we missed any.
Well, I tell you what, before we move on, because there's a ton of optional rules here, and
Okay.
I know we've talked about this one a fair bit, but like there's a ton of optional rules in the DMG. So just to tick off a couple that are super commonly used, feats. Do you consider feats truly optional, or
I keep forgetting they're
do you
optional.
consider them baseline to your 5e games?
Honestly, yeah, that's a good one because I keep forgetting that they're optional.
And they're a huge power boost to the party.
Yeah.
Like they are potentially a very big power boost, especially if you're not playing with like standard array stats.
That would be really funny to run a game with standard array stats and no feats.
Well, so when you do that, that's when you realize how well the balancing system of 5e actually does work. Most people say 5e doesn't work because they add all the rest of this stuff in. That they're optional rules, but the balancing of 5e is not based around any of those optional rules. So anytime you introduce something that adds a power level to the players, that's why I adopted the monster feats, because I had to keep up. Like that sort of thing, like anytime you put more power in the players, you are breaking the balancing of 5e. Even if it's an optional rule in the DMG, you are.
I think I've been having fun with Stratera though because I've been running up you guys against some strong stuff.
Oh yeah, dude.
I've been so I presented it to my players because they just hit level 4 a session or two ago, and I presented it to them as an option of if you all want to take the ability score improvement, go ahead. If you all want to take a feat, go ahead, and just responding to that. So right now, currently, I haven't given any of the bad guys feats or any of the other characters that they're going to run into feats. But as soon as one of them chooses one, you bet your ass they're coming into the game. So kind of doing a call and response style to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that like viewing it as an optional from the perspective, the only time I would view a game to not include feats, because I think they do add an interesting element of how players can express their characters in a lot of ways. I even like to give an additional feat at starting level, so long as it's a non-combat feat. Like I love,
I do like that rule.
I love feats, but for new players, that is the one time, like if I'm running a one shot for new players or an early campaign, something along those lines, I will strictly tell them no feats. Don't make your lives more complicated right now. Don't worry about the extra decisions. Human variant is out for now. Don't worry about it. We may make changes later, but for now, no feats.
Well, and that was the consensus from the party that I'm running right now. Is like, especially we talked about it. I think you all talked about it in the last episode. That the amount of source material that's out now. I, or better or worse, did not limit the source material they could choose from. And they actively made that decision of like, well, we already have enough stuff going on. We don't need feet. Like,
Well,
just focus on character building in a linear fashion.
and I've said it on here several times. Like, I like Adventure League. I've played Adventure League at conventions that I go to. It's really good for drop-in play, D&D. The problem is you get a lot of the people, the role play aspect gets lost because you get a lot of people that concentrate on the combat, which is fine because it's going to draw the people that really like the combat, that really like the class combinations, and there's a lot of players that have a blast at Adventure League. I did. I had fun. As soon as I realized, okay, role play's out the door. This is a meat grinder in a way, depending, especially at conventions. But one thing that I really enjoy when it comes to character creation for Adventure League is you get the DMG +1 for character creation, and that's it. So you can do DMG and Xanathars, DMG and Ravenloft, That's what you get. You can't.
I think they're actually throwing that out now.
Oh God.
I think they are. I'm pretty sure I saw a thing not long ago that they're at least just like debating it because there is so much source material now that I believe there is possibilities of that going away or at least changing.
I still like it for first time players.
I think it's a great way to go about limiting material just to reduce choices for sure.
It's like, especially with the introduction of Tasha's brought so much amazing content and so many amazing options into play. That there's just so much out there.
Oh, that brings up a non DMG option that for me I will never turn down to my players, and that is the optional class features that were introduced in Tasha's. They're like the best thing that Wizards of the Coast has done for 5e since its inception. I adore them.
I used it when I made Jubei.
Yeah. So good. So good.
I surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, since I left them so much material to choose from, no one wanted to do this. But just looking over them, I think that they do a great job of allowing you to fine tune your character to what you actually want it to be, without being necessarily as rigid in the stereotypical roles that a character would be in.
For sure. All right, I think I've expanded that one far enough. I could probably sit here and talk about optional rules and stuff all night if we sit here and keep going. But I'll relinquish the podium.
We could possibly do an entire shooting to crit on optional rules.
We probably could.
And if that's something the audience wants, we will gladly do it.
I literally pulled up, like, I forgot how many there are. I pulled up a list of everything that's in the DMG. I mean, goodness gracious, there's so many. So many.
Gabe with the please no.
Please no. And that one will be hosted by our Forever DMs member, Gabriel. He will do the optional rule, shooting the crit.
Oh yeah, he's in charge.
Yep. He's gonna love it. I can tell already.
He's not here, and as my hetero life mate, I am able to make decisions for him in his absence. So, all right. So number 5, last one of the day. What are some online resources to provide templates or balancing suggestions that you found useful?
Oh, I'm gonna find up the name of mine that I've referenced so many times before I give my answer. So somebody else start this one off.
Okay, so as he's doing that, I'm gonna say something really quick. Do you want it, Sean?
No, go for it.
One other thing that I struggle with, and I really don't think of it as a struggle anymore because of this one online resource, is when someone casts Detect Magic, what is the aura of a magical item?
Yeah.
And 5e Magic Shop is an amazing online resource that they have a lot of the OGL magical items. They have a lot of the Xander magical items. Not only can you create a magic shop that you can just hit restock to where it restocks itself. You can actually type in a magical item and it will give you the aura, the color, what school of magic, everything like that. And it was a struggle for me to begin with, but now that it's one of the things I have pulled up all the time when I'm DMing, especially online. And
that's fantastic. I'm gonna have to steal that from you.
Yeah, it's great. I linked it. I'll give the link to you, and we'll post the link on our Forever DMs Twitter. But yeah, it's 5e Magic Shop. I think we've harped on it before, Jacob and I, because we're big fans. It's an amazing resource. Like I can't even think like one of the easiest ones is a price checker, like Target. You type in a magical item and it gives you the price of the magical item.
Oh, that is wonderful.
Oh yeah, it's so handy, so handy.
But yeah, it's a really awesome tool. I like the idea that with that, you can create a shop, name it, and if you're bad at naming shops, hit random. It'll give you the shop name, it'll give you the shop owner, the name of the shop, personality of the shop owner, and what's in there. But if you're like me and you want to create your own NPCs and everything like that, you can even put character art up. And I haven't even played around with it, but I believe that you can make it available to your players. And if you just don't want to role play the shopping episode, just be like, okay, here's what's up in the shop, and they can peruse and buy stuff as you're continuing role playing. And like, okay, I'm gonna visit the, I think our Cali GM James, he used it too, and it came up with the random spell shop name of the Dirty Wand. And so, like, we just went shopping at the Dirty Wand, and we could just pull it up and buy whatever we wanted. But yeah, it's a great 5e magic shop. It's an amazing tool for DMs and games.
This isn't even a shameless plug anymore. This is just a give me the shame plug at this point. Oh, cool. Let's see. The one that helped me out a lot. I hate coming up with loot tables and rolling on loot tables and generators. So I use 5e Tools Loot Gen quite a bit. I've tried other ones. The amount of descriptive stuff that comes with this, the amount of kind of diversity of loot tables that comes with it, I've been super impressed thus far. My players are also a fan of it, as the first couple generations that I did on it were incredibly player friendly, and some of the other ones that I've done since have not been so player friendly. So it feels like a good balance, especially being able to have a concise place to go for that, so that you can plan ahead, right? Because you don't want to set up this idea of a super extravagant or elegant throne room that the players get to loot, and then your loot generator comes up with like, oh, they get 40 copper and a magic potion. So that idea of having something that's it seems well balanced in my experience with it, and easy to use in a sense of being able to jump in early and plan for things.
Well, I know on our very first episode of Shooting the Crit, we did cover a lot of this.
We did. We talked about a lot of online tools that were super useful for that sort of thing.
So I'm trying not to repeat. D&D Speak, that's a good one. That's like a really good one for like random loot tables, like books you find in a library. Roll a 1d100. It's got 100 random, really funny books that you would find in a library. But D&D Speak is really good. When it comes to loot tables, one of my favorite go-tos, and I've saved most of her stuff, is a Tiefling Lady on Twitter. She is this amazing content creator that will take you loot the body. It's like you loot the mansion, you loot the Triton, you loot the bandit, and it's like 1d12 usually of just really interesting stuff like bag of gems or just stuff that would fit theme into it. Like a good example is one of my favorite things is I loot the cultist, and one of the things you can find randomly on a cultist is a dagger that does +1 only against humans. And it's just little random things like that that's really funny. Like a bell that you ring it and it doesn't ring. And it's like that's something that the players would be like, what the hell is this? And they would keep it on them for like the longest time thinking it's something important. But yeah, some of
Completely
her
useless magical items are the best thing
Yeah.
in D&D, in my opinion. They're so much fun.
The spice bag.
Finding a reason to use stupid little magical items is one of my favorite things. Or introduce them to the games.
Gabriel sent something in via Discord that is a very, very long quick reference. 5e quick reference. It's a simple website you click on, and it gives you a cheat sheet of movement, action, bonus action, reaction, conditions,
Super
everything like that.
quick rulings on things and that sort of stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So finding what I was referencing. I was calling it monster feats earlier. It's actually monster talents. So DM options, monster talents by an author called Dragonix. I'm not quite sure how he pronounces that, but found on Dungeon Masters Guild. It's not a free one, but man, like the $15 that I spent on that wound up being as useful to me as any full priced like 5e book that I have purchased since I started DMing. I adore the templates on that and strongly suggest them to anybody, including Feats, in their games, especially if you're looking at tier 2 or tier 3 play. There is so much you can do to keep up that pace with your party, and A+. It's good stuff. And those talents are available in there for literally every single monster that is in the monster manual.
Along those lines, there's actually a really, really good book series called GM Loot that I believe you can get from GM's Guild and everything. It covers all the monsters in the monsters manual, and you can get supplements for Xanathars, for Mordenkainen's, and it goes into what kind of loot is off these monsters, and it's not just treasure. It's if the party decides they want to play a game of Monster Hunter and cut the monster apart, what parts of the monster can they sell and what it sells for and what's the alchemical use for that monster. It's really handy. It's really cool.
Nice.
That is also reminiscent to a campaign of involving giants and dragons.
The couple others that I follow otherwise, they're not specific references in terms of like quick things to reference, but in terms of garnishing ideas and finding magical items and things that would be cool to introduce or just use as inspiration. Follow things along on Instagram. Find Griffin's Saddlebag. Find Dungeon Scribe. There's a ton of really, really talented content creators out there that come up with some really cool stuff. Watch some of it. Some of it can edge into that power creep pretty quickly. So take things with a grain of salt there. But normally, at least on those two, if they've done something powerful, they have them marked as like a very rare or a legendary item. Like they're very clear that like, this is a big gun. Used sparingly.
Don't give it first level.
But I mean, even sometimes on those, they come up with items and whatnot that aren't in the base books, like boomerang. That the boomerang didn't exist. So Dungeon Scribe has a thing where he gives the base mundane item of a boomerang and how it works and how it functions, and then next to it has a magical item that takes advantage of that and runs with it. I think you actually can find the boomerang at this point, but like just as an example, like there's lots of really talented content creators out there. They're super easy to find, and most of the time they have really incredible artwork to go with it too.
So I think we're within the hour and 30-minute time period that we're shooting for. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Jacob, for joining us today and doing Shooting to Crit. Hopefully we're able to glean some of our information onto you guys in the chat and share what we know with you so you can take it to your games and share it with your peoples. So just doing a really quick announcement. Our next show on Forever DMs will be Thrain next Tuesday on the 13th at 7 p.m. EST. That'll be here. Join us. That is run by Gabriel. Those that are familiar with Gabriel. Very, very good DM. All of us play in it with Selu, Mist, and Jubei.
Yep. Super fun times.
And then following Thrain on the 17th will be Breakfast and Dragons, run by yours truly in the world of Straterra. Very, very. How do you say, Jacob? You're Snoopy, Spoopy,
Super spoopy.
Very spoopy. Very very, very, very dark Lovecraft inspired world.
With the cutest logo ever.
With the cutest logo ever, because you just got to do that. So join us then. It's called Breakfast and Dragons for a reason. It is at 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings, so you can watch us, have fun, eat your breakfast, drink your coffee, and enjoy the rest of your day like we do.
Come catch Oliver, grapple some shit.
Yeah, Oliver, he loves to hug them. He loves them, hugs them all. I'm gonna have to write an encounter where he hugs a bear.
Hugs for everybody.
Because I don't get to do that in real life. So, all right. So thank you very much for spending the evening with us, and hope to catch you next Tuesday.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Thanks, everybody.